The alien Beastwoman is in heat and I'm the only male in 500 miles. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story don't forget to subscribe. Rogers was deep in the dense underbrush of the alien rainforest when the air around him began to thicken, weighed down by an odd mixture of humidity and something primal. The forest had a way of shifting with the seasons, and though he'd been in enough alien jungles to know the signs of danger, something about this place felt different, almost alive in a way that he hadn't experienced before. The trees loomed higher than he had ever seen, their trunks thick and gnarled while vines twisted in unpredictable patterns. The foliage was a mix of vivid greens and harsh browns, and the air was thick with the hum of invisible insects, their buzz reverberating like a soft heartbeat beneath the layers of strange sounds. He adjusted his pack, pulling the strap tighter across his shoulder before stepping forward, his boots crunching softly underfoot. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the very ground beneath him was aware of his presence. This wasn't just any rainforest, it was known across the galaxy for its unique seasonal cycle, one that could either mean life or death for those who wandered into its depths unprepared. Rogers, however, was novice explorer. He had traversed planets far more dangerous than this one, and his calm demeanor in the face of alien wildlife and unpredictable conditions had earned him a reputation as a seasoned traveler. His mission here was straightforward: to collect samples of the local flora and record data about the ecosystem. He wasn't looking for trouble, but the forest had a way of offering more than anyone bargained for. As he made his way through the thick undergrowth, he noticed the signs, scent trails, paw prints, broken branches. None of it looked familiar, and he couldn't place the exact species it belonged to. The trail seemed fresh, too fresh. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, a gut feeling telling him to turn back, but his curiosity got the better of him. The last thing he needed now was to cut his trip short because of a hunch. He paused, scanned his surroundings, and then pushed forward. Rogers had trekked far from his camp, and the unfamiliar terrain was starting to take its toll. He'd been tracking a trail of flowers native to this part of the jungle, but they were few and far between. The air had grown heavier, the shadows deeper, and something in the distance seemed to flicker in the corner of his vision. He took a deep breath, sensing the shift. Then came the growl. It wasn't the growl of any creature he'd ever encountered, and it was closer than he'd anticipated, a low rumbling sound that reverberated through the ground itself, vibrating up his legs. His first instinct was to freeze, every muscle in his body going taut, but the growl came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large pushing through the underbrush, moving with intent. Rogers' training kicked, and instantly his hand went to the blaster at his side, but he knew better than to rely on a weapon in an environment where his prey or predator could be far more formidable than any machine. He adjusted his stance, preparing himself for a quick getaway if necessary. Before he could react, a massive shape emerged from the shadows, its amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The creature that stepped into the clearing was unlike anything Rogers had seen before. Towering and muscular, its fur was a deep brown, thick and matted with a texture that seemed almost too heavy for such a massive body. The creature's features were both elegant and terrifying. Its fangs were enormous, like jagged curved tusks that jutted out from either side of its snout, and its claws were so large they could easily tear through steel. It had a long tail that whipped behind it, knocking over several small trees with a casual swipe. As it approached, Rogers froze, his eyes locked on the creature, and for the first time since arriving on this planet he felt a real sense of danger. The creature didn't seem to be in any hurry, its movements deliberate, its eyes never leaving him. Rogers' first thought was that this had to be one of the apex predators of the rainforest, but as it drew closer he realized there was something different about it. The creature was too composed, too aware of its own power, and there was something else, something unmistakable in the way it looked at him, something that wasn't just about hunting. It stopped a mere 10 ft from him, its eyes narrowing as it sniffed the air, drawing in a deep breath. Rogers instinctively took a step back, his mind racing to assess the situation. He wasn't afraid. He had faced down far more dangerous creatures in the past, but there was a subtle underlying tension in the air that he couldn't ignore. This was no ordinary beast, this was something far More intelligent, far more capable than anything he had encountered on this planet. Then the creature spoke. Its voice was deep, guttural, vibrating through the air like the rumble of thunder. You smelled different. It was more of a growl than anything, but the words were clear enough. Rogers blinked in surprise, unsure whether he had heard it correctly. But before he could respond, the creature took another step closer, and then another, its massive form almost filling the space around him. Roger stood his ground, keeping his hand close to his weapon but not drawing it yet. He had dealt with intelligent species before, and while this creature's size and strength were intimidating, it was clear that it wasn't here to attack him. You're not like the others, the creature continued, now a few feet away. The others avoid me, but you stay. The creature's amber eyes flashed as its lips curled into something resembling a grin. Then it took another step forward, its massive tail sweeping dangerously close to Roger's. Roger steadied his breathing, trying to think quickly. The creature's scent was overwhelming now, musky and animalistic. But there was something oddly appealing about it. He couldn't deny the pull he felt, an instinctive draw he couldn't explain, but he was trained not to trust his instincts in situations like this. He had to think to stay calm. The creature tilted its head slightly, its glowing eyes fixed on him. You will be mine, it said, its tone low and almost playful. Rogers felt the blood drain from his face, but before he could react, the creature made its move, stepping forward with lightning speed, its massive paws clicking softly against the ground. Roger's heart raced as the massive creature moved closer, its presence overwhelming. There was something about the way it moved that was both graceful and menacing, a predator's confidence in every step. Rogers instinctively stepped back, but his boots caught on a route, sending him stumbling. For a brief moment the creature's amber eyes narrowed as it watched him, seemingly amused by his unease, but it didn't attack. Instead it tilted its head, studying him intently as if it were trying to decide something. He could feel the weight of its gaze, and it was unlike anything he had ever experienced. This wasn't just a beast on the hunt, it was intelligent, deliberate, and oddly patient. It didn't seem to see him as prey in the traditional sense, yet the tension in the air was thick enough to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Roger's mind worked quickly, his instincts sharpening. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't acting like any predator he had encountered before, and he wasn't about to make a fool of himself by assuming it was just some dumb animal. The forest around them was still, the normal hum of insects and birds muted, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. For a moment there was silence, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional distant growl. Roger's pulse quickened as he realized that he was standing in a vulnerable position. He could feel the weight of the creature's stare, and despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his mind remained sharp, analyzing every detail. His eyes flickered over the beast's form, taking in the towering figure, its sharp fangs and claws, and the powerful, muscular frame that seemed to pulse with an untamed energy. He had faced dangerous creatures before, but this one was different. It was more like something he had read about in ancient texts, a legend brought to life as the creature's growl reverberated through the air once again. Rogers felt the tension in his chest tighten. This wasn't a simple encounter. This was something far more complicated, and he wasn't sure if it was a challenge or something else entirely. The creature's next words made his heart skip a beat. I'm not here to kill you, it rumbled, its deep voice vibrating in the air. I'm here to claim you. There was no malice in its tone, but the weight of those words hung heavy in the space between them. Roger's instinct screamed at him to run, to escape, but something in the creature's voice held him in place, rooted to the spot. It was as if it knew something he didn't, as if it was playing a game with him, and for a moment he felt like he was the one being tested. He wasn't sure what the creature meant by claiming, but it was clear that this wasn't going to be a simple escape. The beast had no intention of letting him go, and the forest around them seemed to shrink with every passing second. The smell of the creature, earthy, wild and thick, wrapped around him, making his head spin. His body reacted, despite himself, a primal pull that he couldn't explain, but he fought against it, focusing on the facts. He had to keep his head clear. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm not interested in being claimed by anyone, Rogers said. His voice steadied despite the situation. He wasn't going to let fear take hold of him. He had survived worse predicaments than this, and he wasn't going to let some oversized alien creature intimidate him. But as soon as the words left his mouth, he realized how hollow they sounded. It wasn't about what he wanted, not really. It was about what this creature wanted, and from the way it was looking at him it seemed like it wasn't going to take no for an answer. The creature's eyes flashed briefly, the glow in them intensifying, and for a moment Rogers thought it was going to pounce. Instead it simply stepped closer, lowering its head to his level, a low growl vibrating from deep within its chest. "You're the only male for miles," the creature said, its tone almost playful, but there was an underlying edge to it, a sense of urgency. "The others have stayed away. They know what happens when I find someone like you." Roger's mind reeled. He was the only male for miles. The implication of that statement began to sink in, and his instincts urged him to run, but he didn't. He stayed put, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the situation. This creature, this Beastwoman, was in heat, and he was the prize. The realization hit him like a slap to the face. He had wandered into the middle of a dangerous mating season without even knowing it. It wasn't just survival now. It was about how to navigate this bizarre, unexpected encounter without falling into the trap the creature was setting for him. He didn't know much about the mating rituals of alien species, but he was pretty sure he didn't want to be part of some ritualistic mating ceremony with a creature that could rip him apart if it wanted to. Still, he couldn't help but wonder why it hadn't just attacked him by now. It was as if it was testing him, probing him, seeing how he would react. The creature's lips curled into something that could almost be considered a smile, though it looked more like a baring of fangs than anything comforting. "I don't want to hurt you," it said, the words soft and almost soothing in contrast to its ferocity, "but I'm not leaving without you." Rogers felt a knot tighten in his stomach, and the air around them seemed to grow even heavier. He wasn't sure what this creature meant by leaving without you, but it didn't sound like a simple offer. It sounded more like a demand, and that was a problem, a big problem. His instincts told him to find a way out, to escape before it was too late, but the forest seemed to close in around him, and every movement he made only seemed to make the creature closer. Its amber eyes locked on him with an intensity he couldn't escape. He backed up a step, his hand brushing the blaster at his side. He didn't want to use it unless he had to, but he was ready if the creature decided to attack. His thoughts raced as he weighed his options. He could try to fight his way out, but that didn't seem like a winning move. This creature was far stronger, faster, and more prepared for the environment than he was. No, his only real option was to talk, to try to outsmart it, to make it understand that he wasn't a threat to it, and that he wasn't going to be anyone's mate. But even as the words formed in his mind, he knew that nothing was going to be easy in this jungle, not with Sheba closing in on him. The battle wasn't just about survival, it was about figuring out just how much he was willing to give in to his own primal instincts, and how far he could go before he had to make the hardest decision of his life. The creature's presence loomed over him, the tension between them palpable as its amber eyes tracked every movement he made. Rogers could feel the weight of its gaze, sharp and calculating, assessing him as if he were little more than an object to be possessed. Despite the growing sense of danger, a part of him couldn't help but remain intrigued by the way it moved, powerful, confident, and yet strangely graceful, like something far more intelligent than just a wild beast. The air around them was thick with the earthy scent of the rainforest, mixed with the faintest traces of the creature's primal scent. Rogers took a step back, his pulse quickening as his survival instincts kicked in, but he remained calm, holding his ground. He wasn't going to let this creature, or whatever it was, intimidate him. He wasn't some naive fool wandering into unknown territory. He knew the dangers of the wild and had always managed to come out on top, but there was something about the creature in front of him that made him question whether this situation was one he could control. Sheba's eyes flickered with something dark and unreadable, a sense of raw power emanating from her. It wasn't the look of a predator about to strike, no, it was something more complex. It was the look of a creature aware of her strength, her dominance, but also her vulnerability. Rogers could see the subtle shift in her posture, the way her muscles rippled as she relaxed slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him wonder if there was more to this encounter than just some simple animal Instinct, do you really think you can just walk away from this? Sheba's voice, though low and guttural, carried an edge of amusement, as though the question itself were a challenge. You think you can leave
this forest without facing what's coming for you? Roger's gaze never wavered, his mind already working through the possible outcomes of the situation. He was far from being outmatched physically, but he wasn't sure how far he could push this. Sheba's presence was overwhelming, and despite his calm demeanor, there was a part of him that felt the weight of the moment. His thoughts shifted from defense to strategy. He wasn't going to fight his way out, not unless absolutely necessary. He had to think. I don't want any part of your ritual, Roger said evenly, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm not here for whatever it is you think I'm supposed to be. I'm here to do my job. That's all. I'm not interested in playing some game with you. Sheba's eyes narrowed at his words, the muscles in her jaw twitching slightly. For a moment, there was silence and intense, unspoken communication between them as Roger stood his ground. She seemed to be sizing him up, weighing his words as if considering something. You don't get to choose, she rumbled. The words hit him harder than he expected, and for a brief moment his breath caught in his chest. There was a primal finality in her tone that suggested this wasn't just about her being in heat. It was about something much deeper, something that had been happening long before he had ever stepped foot in this alien jungle. Sheba's eyes glowed brighter, and her posture shifted slightly, her long tail swishing behind her as she circled him. Slowly, deliberately, Rogers knew better than to turn his back to her, so he kept his body facing her, every sense alert for any sign of movement. The creature didn't make any sudden moves, though instead she seemed to be playing some kind of game, studying him. Like a puzzle, she was slowly piecing together. The growing tension in the air was suffocating, and Rogers could feel the thick pulse of adrenaline in his veins as he watched her, trying to anticipate what she would do next. But it was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't some random encounter. It wasn't just an animal hunting its prey. This was deliberate. She was making a choice, and he was the one she had chosen. The thought of it made his stomach twist. He wasn't just some accidental target. He was the focus of her desire, the object of her attention. His mind raced, trying to find a way out of the situation, but he knew there was no simple escape. He had walked into this jungle willingly, trusting his knowledge of the terrain and his ability to survive in any environment. But this wasn't just any jungle. This was a place governed by rules he didn't fully understand, and the creatures here were unlike anything he'd ever encountered. As he stood there face to face with Sheba, his mind began to shift from pure survival to something more personal. There was something deeply unsettling about being the object of someone or something's obsession, and the thought of being trapped in this alien world, bound by rules and rituals beyond his understanding, sent a chill down his spine. Sheba's voice broke through his thoughts, low and almost sensual. You think you can resist me? She asked, a hint of laughter in her tone. You think you can walk away from this? You think you can leave me behind? Rogers gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of her words pressed down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about control, power, and something much deeper than he had expected. The idea of submitting to this creature, of being claimed by her in whatever twisted ritual she had in mind, was unthinkable. But as much as he wanted to fight against it, as much as he wanted to pull away, he couldn't deny the pull that was growing inside him. It was something primal, something he couldn't quite control. The desire, the need, was there, just beneath the surface, fighting against his rational mind. But Rogers wasn't about to let his instincts control him. It wasn't some helpless fool who would give in without a fight. You're not going to get what you want, he said, his voice firm. I'm not just some prize for you to claim. I'm not your plaything, and I won't be part of your games. Sheba's eyes flashed at his words, her lips curling into a feral grin. As she stepped closer, the air between them crackled with tension, and Rogers felt his heart rate increase again, his instincts screaming at him to escape. But she was too close now. He couldn't outrun her. He couldn't fight her. He had to outthink her. You really think you can deny me? She purred, her voice low and teasing. I've already marked you, Rogers. You belong to me now. The words were like a physical blow, and Rogers felt a shiver run down his spine. He was trapped not by his body, but by the situation, by the inescapable truth that she had already made her choice. He could resist all he wanted, but he knew the odds were stacked against him, It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about what came next and how far he was willing to go to survive. Rogers could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him as Sheba continued to circle him, her movements slow and deliberate, her amber eyes fixed on him like a predator eyeing its prey. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, and yet there was something about her, something fierce and untamable, that kept him rooted in place. Unable to break free, his instincts screamed at him to run, to fight back, but he remained still, calculating, searching for an opening, an opportunity to regain control of the situation. He had no idea what she was thinking, what her true intentions were, but there was no denying that she had him trapped both physically and mentally. The air was thick with tension, the forest around them eerily silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the sound of Sheba's deep breaths as she studied him. Rogers could see the strength in her movements, the raw power in her muscular frame, and for a fleeting moment he questioned whether he could ever hope to overpower her. She was built for survival in this harsh environment, honed by the jungle's dangers, and he was an outsider, a man who had only recently set foot in this alien world. But even as doubt crept into his mind, he refused to let it consume him. He was a seasoned explorer capable of adapting to any situation, and he had faced far worse dangers in his life. This, however, was different. This was not a creature he could simply outsmart or outrun. No, this was a creature that operated on a different set of rules, a creature that saw him not just as an intruder, but as something more, a mate, a possession, a prize. The thought made his stomach churn, but he wasn't going to let it control him. He wasn't going to give in, and not without a fight. He had to find a way out, a way to regain the upper hand. His mind raced, his thoughts spinning. As he considered his options, he couldn't let his emotions dictate his actions. He needed to stay calm, to keep his focus. Sheba's words echoed in his mind. You belong to me now. He knew she was playing some kind of game, testing him, seeing how far he would go before he broke, before he submitted to her. But Rogers wasn't about to be another victim of some twisted jungle ritual. He was better than that. The longer Sheba lingered in his space, the more the primal tension between them grew. Rogers couldn't deny that he felt it too, a flicker of attraction that gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Her scent, her raw power, the way she commanded the space, it was intoxicating, but he refused to let that distraction sway him. He had come here to complete his mission, not to become a pawn in some alien mating game. He had to stick to his plan, had to stay true to his purpose. Sheba's eyes narrowed as she circled him, studying him, as if trying to predict his next move. He could feel the intensity of her gaze, her body language signaling that she wasn't going to back down. She was relentless, and every instinct he had told him that she would not let him go easily. Her tail swished behind her, knocking over small trees and bushes with each movement, and Rogers couldn't help but wonder how much destruction she could cause if she decided to unleash her full power. His mind raced with possibilities, strategies, and ways to escape, but the longer he stood there, the more he realized that his options were limited. This was not just a battle of strength, it was a battle of will. She had made her choice, and now it was his turn to decide how far he was willing to go to protect his own freedom. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Sheba stopped moving for a moment, her gaze fixed on him, a glimmer of something he couldn't quite read flashing in her eyes. He took the opportunity to speak, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I'm not your possession," he said, his words firm and unwavering. "I don't belong to anyone, and I sure as hell don't belong to you." For a moment there was silence, and Rogers wondered if he had said the wrong thing. But then Sheba spoke, her voice a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate in the air. "You don't get to choose that," she said. "Not anymore. I've marked you. You're mine." There was an edge to her voice, a finality that left no room for argument. Rogers' mind raced as he tried to process her words. He wasn't sure what she meant by marked, but it sounded like she was claiming him in some way, like a trophy, like something that couldn't be undone. His pulse quickened as he realized how serious this situation had become. She wasn't going to just let him walk away. He had walked into her territory, into her world, and now he was caught in her game. "You think I'm just going to accept that?" Rogers shot back, his tone more defiant. Then he felt he wasn't about to show weakness, not in front of her. He had to stand his ground, but Sheba just smiled a Slow, predatory grin that sent a chill down his spine. "You don't have a choice," she said simply, her voice dripping with authority. "You've already made your decision, you've entered my domain, and now you belong to me." Words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had thought he could handle this, that he could talk his way out of it, but it was becoming clear that this wasn't something he could talk his way out of. He was no longer in control. Sheba had claimed him, and now he had to figure out how to survive her, the thought of being trapped in her world, bound by some alien. Ritual made his blood run cold. He wasn't sure what it would take to break free. But he knew he couldn't let her win. He couldn't let this Beastwoman dictate his fate. "I'm not your plaything, Roger," said, his voice more forceful now. "You don't get to decide what happens to me." Sheba took a step closer, her massive frame looming over him, her fangs glinting in the dim light. "You'll learn soon enough," she murmured, her voice soft but full of menace. "You'll learn what happens when you cross me." Rogers braced himself, his mind racing with plans, with ways to escape, but he knew deep down that there was no easy way out of this. She wasn't just a predator, she was a force of nature, and he had no choice but to adapt to her rules if he wanted to survive. The realization settled in slowly, like a cold weight pressing on his chest. This wasn't just a physical confrontation, it was a battle of wills. And as much as he hated to admit it, he had a long way to go before he could escape her grip. The jungle around them seemed to close, in the air heavy with anticipation, as Sheba stood in front of him, her presence overwhelming. This was her world now, and he was just a player in her game, but Rogers wasn't one to give up easily. He would fight. He had to. The tension in the air felt like a tangible thing, thick and suffocating, as Sheba's words lingered between them. Roger stood his ground, forcing himself to breathe slowly despite the rush of adrenaline flooding his system. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to break free, to run, but deep down he knew that the moment he tried to flee, she would be on him like a shadow. She wasn't just a creature of instinct. She was deliberate, calculating, and her power was palpable, a force that seemed to envelope him from every direction. As he stood there, his mind worked frantically, trying to make sense of the situation. He wasn't sure what to think about Sheba's claim, her insistence that he belonged to her. It felt wrong, like some primal instinct was overriding his rational mind, but he refused to let that primal urge dictate his actions. He had to stay sharp. He had to stay in control. Because once he let go, there was no going back. He wasn't some helpless man that could be swept away by the whims of an alien predator. He was an explorer, a survivor, and he was going to find a way out of this. "You really think you can break me?" Roger said, his voice steady despite the rising unease within him. Sheba's amber eyes flickered, her lips curling into something that might have been a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't need to break you," she rumbled, her voice like the rumble of distant thunder. "You're already broken, you just don't know it." Yet Rogers clenched his fists, resisting the urge to lash out. She was right about one thing: he was trapped, but he wasn't broken, not yet. He couldn't afford to give in to her. He wasn't going to become another victim of some jungle ritual. As much as he could feel the pull of something deeper, something primal, he